Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
5 True Vacation Horror Stories. Story 1. The Cabin in Whistling Woods. Last summer, my friends Jake, Sarah, Emma, and I decided to rent a remote cabin in the mountains of Colorado for a week-long getaway. We found this perfect place online called Whistling Woods Retreat, a rustic log cabin surrounded by dense pine forest, miles away from the nearest town. The photos showed a cozy interior, with a stone fireplace and a wraparound porch overlooking the wilderness. The price was surprisingly cheap for such a beautiful location, which should have been our first warning sign. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon after a 3-hour drive down increasingly narrow dirt roads. The cabin looked exactly like the photos, but there was something unsettling about the silence that surrounded us. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just an unnatural quiet that seemed to press against our ears. The only sound was a strange, low whistling that seemed to come from the trees themselves. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Hendricks, met us at the cabin to hand over the keys. He was thin and weathered with pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through us. As he showed us around, he kept glancing nervously at the tree line and speaking in hushed tones. "Few rules you need to follow," he said as he prepared to leave. "Never go into the woods after dark. Keep all doors and windows locked at night. And whatever you do, don't respond to any voices you might hear calling your name from outside after sunset." We laughed nervously, thinking he was just trying to add some local flavor to our mountain experience. How wrong we were. The first night passed without incident, though that eerie whistling continued all evening. On the second day, we decided to explore the area during daylight hours. About a quarter-mile from the cabin, we found an old cemetery hidden among the trees. The headstones were ancient and weathered, most dating back to the 1800s. What was strange was that nearly all of them bore the same death date, October 13th, 1847. That night, around 2 a.m., I was awakened by Sarah shaking me violently. She was pale and trembling, pointing toward the window. "There's someone out there," she whispered. "They've been calling my name for the past 10 minutes. I listened carefully and heard it too. A voice that sounded exactly like Sarah's mother calling her name from somewhere in the darkness beyond our porch. The voice was pleading, desperate, begging Sarah to come outside. "Sarah, honey, please come help me. I'm lost and scared. Please, Sarah, I need you." Jake and Emma woke up too, and we all huddled together, listening to this impossible voice. Sarah's mother lived in Florida, over 1,000 miles away, but the voice was perfect. Every inflection, every emotional nuance was exactly right. The calling continued for hours, sometimes Sarah's name, sometimes Jake's, sometimes mine. The voices belonged to our loved ones, parents, siblings, even deceased grandparents. Each voice was perfectly accurate, filled with pain and desperation, begging us to come outside and help them. We followed Mr. Hendricks's advice and didn't respond, but it was torture listening to those familiar voices in distress. Finally, around dawn, the voices stopped and that strange whistling resumed. The next day we tried to leave. Our car wouldn't start. Jake was good with engines, but he couldn't find anything wrong with it. We had no cell phone service, and we were miles from the nearest neighbor. We were trapped. That's when we started finding the notes. They were slipped under our door during the day, while we were all together in the main room. Handwritten messages in familiar handwriting, our own handwriting, but we hadn't written them. My note said, "Don't trust the others, they're not who they seem. Come to the cemetery alone at midnight if you want to know the truth about what happened here." Each of us received similar notes, all designed to make us suspicious of each other and lure us outside alone. We showed each other the notes and stayed together, but the psychological pressure was enormous. On the fourth night, Emma snapped. The voices had been calling to her for hours, her deceased father begging her to come say goodbye properly. She couldn't take it anymore and ran for the door. We tackled her just as she was about to unlock it. Through the window, we could see a figure standing at the edge of the porch. It looked exactly like her father, but something was wrong with its proportions. Too tall, arms too long, face slightly off, like a photograph that had been stretched. That's when we realized what we were dealing with. These weren't ghosts or spirits. They were something that could mimic our loved ones perfectly but couldn't quite get the physical details right. We spent the rest of the night researching on Emma's laptop using the cabin's weak Wi-Fi connection. We found newspaper articles from 1847 about a missing wagon train that had last been seen in this area. 18 people vanished without a trace, including an entire family named Hendricks. The next morning brought the worst discovery yet. We found Mr. Hendricks's truck parked behind the cabin, keys still in the ignition. Inside the glove compartment was his wallet, driver's license, and a newspaper clipping about his disappearance 3 weeks earlier. We'd been given the keys by something that was pretending to be Mr. Hendricks. As we processed this terrifying realization, we heard Sarah's voice coming from outside. "Guys, I found help. There's a park ranger out here who can get us out." But Sarah was standing right next to us. We looked out the window and saw a perfect duplicate of Sarah talking to something that looked like a park ranger. The fake Sarah was gesturing toward the cabin and seemed to be explaining our situation. But we could see the wrongness in both figures, subtle distortions in their movements, faces that were almost right, but somehow hollow. That night, we barricaded ourselves in the single interior room with no windows. The voices became a cacophony, dozens of familiar voices all calling our names, pleading, threatening, cajoling. We could hear footsteps on the porch, scratching at the walls, doorknobs turning. Around 3 a.m., everything went silent. Then we heard Jake's voice from right outside our barricaded door. "Guys, it's okay, they're gone. I found a way out. Open the door." But Jake was sitting right there with us. The voice continued, "Come on, don't be stupid, it's really me. Look, I'll prove it." Then the voice began recounting memories that only Jake would know. Childhood stories, private conversations we'd had, details about his family that none of us knew. The worst part was watching Jake's face as he listened to this perfect imitation of himself trying to trick us into opening the door. The psychological torment was unbearable. On our 6th morning, we were awakened by the sound of car engines. Looking out the window, we saw 3 sheriff's department vehicles pulling up to the cabin. Real deputies got out, looking official and legitimate. They called our names and said they were responding to a missing persons report filed by our families. We almost ran outside to greet them. Almost. But then we noticed that one of the deputies cast no shadow despite the bright morning sun. Another one's reflection was missing in the cabin's windows. And the third was wearing Jake's exact clothes from the day before. We stayed inside and watched these fake deputies search around the cabin, calling our names and promising help. After an hour, they drove away, but we could see them park just beyond the tree line. They were waiting. That afternoon, in desperation, we decided to make a break for it on foot. We gathered supplies and planned to hike out through the forest, avoiding the road where the fake deputies were waiting. As we prepared to leave, we found one final note that chilled us to the bone. It was written in my handwriting and said, "Thank you for staying so long. We've learned so much from watching you. Soon we'll be able to leave this place and visit your families. They'll be so happy to see you again." We ran into the forest as fast as we could. The trees seemed to whisper and call our names, but we didn't stop. Behind us, we could hear multiple voices calling for us to come back. Our own voices, our family's voices, the voices of friends and loved ones. After hiking for what felt like hours, we finally reached a main road and flagged down a real truck driver who took us to town. The local sheriff confirmed that the Whistling Woods area had a history of disappearances dating back over a century, but no one could ever prove anything supernatural was happening. We never found out what became of our car, and we never received our security deposit back. More disturbing, when we tried to contact the rental agency, we discovered it didn't exist. The website was gone, the phone number disconnected, and no record of Whistling Woods Retreat could be found anywhere. 6 months later, Jake received A Christmas card from his grandmother who had died when he was 12. The card was postmarked from the town near the cabin, and inside was a family photo we'd taken on our first night there. But in the photo, there was a fifth person standing behind us, someone we'd never seen before, wearing Jake's exact clothes and Jake's exact face. We burned the photo and never spoke about our experience again. But sometimes, late at night, we each receive phone calls from numbers we don't recognize. When we answer, we hear our own voices on the other end, asking us to come back to Whistling Woods. They miss us, they say. They learned so much from us, and they have so many friends they'd like us to meet. Story 2. The Cruise Ship Photographer. My wife Linda and I booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise for our 25th wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be the perfect romantic getaway, tropical destinations, gourmet dining, and endless ocean views. We'd saved for 2 years to afford the luxury suite on the Sapphire Dream, and we were determined to make every moment count. Everything started wonderfully. The ship was magnificent, our suite was spacious with a private balcony, and the weather was perfect. On our first night, we attended the welcome dinner where we met the ship's photographer, a charming middle-aged man named Marcus, who specialized in capturing once-in-a-lifetime vacation memories. Marcus was everywhere on that ship, at dinner, by the pool, during shore excursions. He had this uncanny ability to appear at the perfect moment to capture candid shots of passengers enjoying themselves. His portfolio was impressive, and he convinced several couples to book private photo sessions for special occasions. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he told us as he showed us his work on a tablet. "I have a gift for capturing the soul of a moment, the real emotion behind the smile." The photos were indeed beautiful, but there was something unsettling about them that I couldn't quite identify. The people in the pictures looked happy, but their eyes seemed empty, hollow, like they were looking at something terrible just beyond the camera's view. On our third day, during a port stop in Cozumel, Marcus approached us with an offer. He'd noticed how much Linda and I loved each other, he said, and he wanted to do a complimentary sunset photo shoot on a secluded beach he knew about. It would be just the two of us, no other tourists, with the most romantic backdrop imaginable. Linda was thrilled by the idea, and despite my vague uneasiness, I agreed. Marcus gave us directions to a small, private beach about 20 minutes from the main tourist area. He said he'd meet us there at 6 p.m. with his equipment. The beach was indeed beautiful and completely deserted. Crystal clear water, white sand, and palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze. We arrived a few minutes early and were enjoying the solitude when Marcus appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, carrying several bags of photography equipment. "Perfect timing," he said with that charming smile. "The light is absolutely magical right now." The photo session began normally enough. Marcus posed us in various romantic positions, walking hand in hand along the water's edge, Linda laughing as I whispered in her ear, both of us watching the sunset. He was professional and friendly, offering encouragement and direction as he worked. But as the sun got lower, Marcus became more intense, almost frantic. He kept checking his watch and urging us to try just one more pose, even though we'd been shooting for over an hour and were getting tired. "The light is almost perfect," he kept saying. "Just a few more minutes, this is going to be the shot of a lifetime." That's when I noticed something strange about his camera. Every time the flash went off, it seemed unusually bright. Not just bright enough to illuminate us, but bright enough to hurt our eyes and leave us blinking and disoriented for several seconds afterward. "Marcus," I said after one particularly blinding flash, "maybe we should wrap this up. We're supposed to be back on the ship by 8. "Almost done," he replied, but his friendly demeanor had changed. There was something desperate in his voice. Now, something hungry. "Just one more shot. I need the perfect shot." He positioned us facing the camera with the sunset behind us. As he prepared to take the photo, I noticed that Linda seemed strange. Her expression was blank, her eyes unfocused, as if she wasn't quite there anymore. "Linda?" I touched her arm, and she looked at me with confusion, as if she didn't recognize me for a moment. That's when Marcus took the photo. The flash was blinding, more intense than anything I'd ever experienced. For a few seconds, I was completely disoriented, seeing spots and feeling dizzy. When my vision cleared, I felt different, detached, like I was watching everything happen to someone else. Perfect, Marcus said, reviewing the image on his camera. Absolutely perfect. He showed us the photo, and I felt a chill run down my spine. We looked happy in the picture, but something was wrong with our faces. They were our faces, but they seemed flat, lifeless, like we were wearing masks of ourselves. We should head back now, I said, though the words felt strange in my mouth, like I was hearing someone else speak. The trip back to the cruise ship was a blur. Linda and I barely spoke, both of us seeming lost in our own thoughts. When we returned to our suite, we went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd lost something important, but I couldn't remember what. Linda seemed different too. She was going through the motions of enjoying our vacation, but there was a mechanical quality to her movements, like she was following a script. At breakfast, we saw Marcus across the dining room, working with another couple. He caught my eye and smiled, giving me a little wave. That's when I noticed the couple he was with. They had the same blank, hollow look in their eyes that I'd seen in his portfolio photos. I excused myself and went back to our cabin, desperately trying to remember what had happened on the beach. The memories were there, but they felt muffled, like they were wrapped in cotton. I found the business card Marcus had given us and noticed something I'd missed before. In small print at the bottom it said, "Specializing in memory preservation, since 2008. That afternoon, I decided to do some investigating. I found the ship's guest services desk and asked about Marcus. The woman behind the counter looked confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have anyone named Marcus working as a photographer on this cruise." "That's impossible," I insisted. "He's been taking photos all week. He did a session with my wife and me yesterday." She checked her computer again. "Sir, according to our records, you and your wife booked a photo session with our ship photographer, but it's scheduled for tomorrow evening, and our photographer's name is Jennifer, not Marcus." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "Can you show me your photographer?" She pointed across the lobby to a young woman with a camera, clearly the ship's official photographer. It wasn't Marcus. I rushed back to our cabin and found Linda sitting on the balcony, staring out at the ocean with that same blank expression. When I tried to talk to her about Marcus and the photo session, she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "I don't remember any photo session, honey. Are you feeling all right?" I checked my phone for the photos from yesterday, but they were gone. Not deleted. They'd never existed, but I could see the business card Marcus had given me still sitting on our nightstand. That evening, I went to the beach where we'd met Marcus. It took me a while to find it because it looked completely different, rocky and unwelcoming, with no white sand or palm trees, just a desolate stretch of coastline that no tourist would ever want to visit. But I found something there that made my blood run cold. Buried partially in the rocks were dozens of cameras, old film cameras, digital cameras, phone cameras, all corroded by salt water and age, and scattered among them were hundreds of photographs. I picked up some of the photos and felt sick. They showed couples and families on vacation, all with that same hollow, lifeless look in their eyes. Some of the photos were recent, but others looked decades old. At the bottom of each photo was a signature, Marcus, Memory Preservation Specialist. I gathered as many photos as I could carry and raced back to the ship. In our cabin, I showed them to Linda, but she couldn't see them. To her, I was holding blank pieces of paper. "Honey, you're scaring me. Maybe you should see the ship doctor." That night, I barely slept, trying to piece together what had happened. In the morning, I had a terrible realization. I went to the mirror and looked closely at my own eyes. They were different, not completely hollow like in Marcus's photos, but definitely changed. Dimmer somehow, like a light had been turned down, inside me. I spent the rest of the cruise researching, using the ship's internet to look up anything I could find about mysterious photographers and memory loss. What I discovered was terrifying. There were reports going back decades of a photographer who appeared on cruise ships, always using the name Marcus. always offering free photo sessions to couples celebrating special occasions. The couples would return from these sessions changed, not dramatically but subtly. They'd lose interest in things they'd once loved, become more passive, more compliant. Some reports described it as if part of their soul had been captured and kept by the photographer, leaving them with less of themselves than before. The most chilling part was a forum post from a woman whose parents had encountered Marcus on their anniversary cruise in 1987. She wrote, "They came back from that trip different. Not dramatically different, but like someone had turned down their personalities. They stopped laughing as much, stopped pursuing their hobbies, stopped being fully present in their own lives. They lived for 30 more years, but it was like they were living at half capacity. I realized that's exactly what had happened to Linda and me. We'd lost something essential during that photo session, something we could never get back. On our last night aboard the ship, I found Marcus in the bar. He looked exactly the same as when we'd first met him, but now I could see the truth. He wasn't entirely human anymore. Whatever he was, he sustained himself by stealing pieces of people's souls through his photography. "Ah, you remember," he said when he saw me approaching. "Most people forget completely within a few days. What did you do to us?" He smiled sadly. "I preserved your memories, just like my card says. The happiest moment of your 25th anniversary will live forever in that photograph. Of course, you can't experience that level of joy anymore yourselves, but isn't it beautiful that it's been captured for eternity? Give it back." "I'm afraid that's impossible. The memory is part of my collection now. But don't worry, you'll hardly notice what you've lost. Most people adapt quite well to living with less." I wanted to attack him, to demand our stolen joy back, but I felt too empty inside to muster that level of passion. That's when I understood the true horror of what he'd done. He hadn't just stolen our happiness, he'd stolen our ability to fight for it. Linda and I returned home from our anniversary cruise, and everyone commented on how relaxed and peaceful we looked. They didn't realize we looked peaceful because we'd lost the capacity for intense emotion. We went through the motions of our normal lives, but everything felt muted, distant. 6 months later, we received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a beautiful photo album containing pictures of our anniversary cruise. Pictures I'd never seen before, moments I couldn't remember. The final page contained the sunset photo Marcus had taken of us on that secluded beach. In the photo, Linda and I were radiating pure joy and love. We looked more alive and happy than I'd ever seen us. But looking at that photo, I felt nothing. No recognition, no emotion, just emptiness. At the bottom of the page was a note in Marcus's handwriting. "Thank you for your contribution to my collection. Your joy will live forever, exactly as it was in that perfect moment." Sometimes I wonder if other people can tell what we've lost, if they notice that Linda and I are just going through the motions of being happy. But mostly I don't wonder about anything anymore. It takes too much energy, and we don't have much energy left. We've stopped taking photos on our vacations. We've stopped taking vacations altogether. What would be the point? Story 3. The all-inclusive resort. When my college roommates and I decided to take a girls' trip to Mexico for my 30th birthday, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. Through a last-minute travel app, we found an incredible deal on a 5-star all-inclusive resort in the Riviera Maya, the kind of place that normally costs $500 per night, available for just $89. Casa del Mar looked like paradise in the photos. Pristine white beaches, infinity pools, elegant suites with ocean views, and gourmet restaurants. The reviews were mostly glowing, though I noticed a few strange negative comments about guests not being able to leave when they wanted to, and the staff being too friendly. I dismissed these as complaints from difficult travelers. My friends Jessica, Amanda, and Rachel were as excited as I was. We'd been planning this trip for months, looking forward to a week of sun, relaxation, and catching up after years of busy careers and family responsibilities. The resort promised an experience you'll never forget, and service that anticipates your every need. We should have paid attention to that wording. The resort was even more beautiful than the photos suggested. As our shuttle approached the entrance, We were amazed by the lush tropical gardens, the pristine grounds, and the stunning architecture that perfectly blended modern luxury with traditional Mexican design. The ocean beyond was the most brilliant blue I'd ever seen. At check-in, we were greeted by the resort manager, Elena, a sophisticated woman in her 40s with perfect English and a warm, welcoming smile. She personally escorted us to our suite, pointing out amenities and explaining the resort's unique approach to hospitality. At Casa del Mar, we pride ourselves on creating such a perfect experience that our guests never want to leave, she said, as she showed us our oceanfront terrace. In fact, many of our visitors extend their stays far beyond what they originally planned. Our suite was incredible. 2 bedrooms, a living area with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private terrace with a hot tub overlooking the Caribbean. Everything was spotless and elegantly appointed. We felt like celebrities. That first day was perfect. We spent hours by the pool, enjoyed amazing meals at the beachfront restaurant, and were treated like royalty by the staff. Every employee we encountered was incredibly friendly and attentive. They remembered our names immediately, anticipated our needs before we even realized what we wanted, and seemed genuinely delighted by our presence. The other guests were equally friendly. Everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives, and several people struck up conversations with us, sharing recommendations for activities and restaurants. There was a festive, almost euphoric atmosphere throughout the resort. But on our second day, I started noticing some odd things. First, I realized I hadn't seen anyone checking out. We'd arrived on a Tuesday, so surely some guests would be ending their vacations and leaving. But I never saw anyone at the front desk with luggage, heading to the shuttle area, or saying goodbye to staff. When I mentioned this to Jessica, she laughed it off. Maybe everyone's just having such a good time they're extending their stays, she said, echoing Elena's words. The second strange thing was the staff's reaction when we mentioned wanting to explore outside the resort. When Amanda suggested we take a day trip to see some Mayan ruins, our waiter's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, but why would you want to leave paradise?" he said, quickly recovering his cheerful demeanor. "We have everything you could possibly want right here. Plus, the outside world can be so unpredictable. So many tourists have unfortunate experiences when they venture beyond our safe, controlled environment." The third oddity was more subtle. I started paying attention to the other guests and realized that while everyone was friendly and seemed happy, there was something slightly off about their behavior. They moved through the resort like they were following familiar routines, visiting the same spots at the same times each day. Their conversations, while pleasant, seemed to follow predictable patterns. On our fourth day, I decided to do some exploring on my own while the others napped by the pool. I walked toward what I thought was the resort's exit, following signs that should have led to the main road. But after 20 minutes of walking through increasingly dense tropical vegetation, the path simply ended at a thick wall of jungle. I tried another route, following what appeared to be a service road. This one led to a high stone wall topped with decorative ironwork that was clearly designed to keep people in rather than out. There was a gate, but it was locked. And when I peered through the bars, I could see nothing but empty roads stretching into the distance. That evening, I casually asked Elena about transportation for a day trip to town. "I'm afraid our shuttle service is currently suspended due to local conditions," she said smoothly. "But really, why would you want to leave? We have everything you need for the perfect vacation." When I pressed her about what these local conditions were, she became vague, mentioning something about road construction and political unrest that made it unsafe for tourists to travel. But her explanations felt rehearsed, and I noticed that her warm smile never quite reached her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the small inconsistencies I'd observed. The other guests' routinized behavior, the staff's subtle discouragement of any interest in the outside world, the apparent impossibility of actually leaving the resort grounds. Around 3 a.m., I stepped onto our terrace for some fresh air and noticed something that chilled me to the bone. I could see into the terrace of the suite next door, where an older couple was sitting in their hot tub. They'd been at the resort when we arrived and had mentioned they were on their 10th anniversary trip. But as I watched them, I realized they weren't talking or interacting like a couple on a romantic getaway. They were sitting in complete silence, staring straight ahead with blank expressions. They stayed like that for nearly an hour before finally going inside, moving with the mechanical precision of robots following programming. The next morning, I shared my concerns with my friends, but they dismissed me as being paranoid. "Maybe you're just not used to being pampered," Rachel said. "This is exactly the kind of relaxation we all needed. Why are you looking for problems when we're having such a great time?" But I noticed that my friends were changing too. They'd become more passive, more content to simply follow the resort's daily routine. They showed less interest in our usual animated conversations and seemed perfectly happy to spend hours just lying by the pool in a semi-trance-like state. That afternoon, I decided to test something. I approached one of the guests I'd been watching, a middle-aged man who'd been there when we arrived and seemed to follow the same exact routine every day. I struck up a conversation and casually asked how long he'd been at the resort. "Oh, I just got here yesterday," he said with that same glazed smile I'd seen on so many faces. But I knew that was impossible. I'd seen him following the same routine for 5 days straight. When I gently pressed him about this discrepancy, he became confused and agitated before excusing himself and walking away with mechanical precision toward the pool bar. That evening, I excused myself from dinner and went exploring again. This time, I was more systematic, mapping out the resort's boundaries and looking for any way to communicate with the outside world. I discovered that while the resort claimed to have Wi-Fi, no internet-dependent communications actually worked. Emails wouldn't send, social media wouldn't load, and phone calls wouldn't connect. In the business center, I found computers that appeared to be connected to the internet, but every website I tried to access showed the same message. "This site is not available from your current location." Even trying to access basic sites like weather services or news organizations resulted in the same error message. It was as if the resort existed in its own isolated bubble, completely cut off from the rest of the world. On our 6th day, something happened that confirmed my worst fears. Amanda mentioned that she'd tried to book a spa appointment for the following week. "Wait," I said. "We're supposed to check out tomorrow." She looked at me blankly. "Are we? I thought we were staying longer. I mean, why would we leave? Everything here is perfect." I checked our booking confirmation on my phone and felt my stomach drop. According to the app, our reservation was originally for 7 days, checking out on Sunday. But now the app showed an open-ended reservation with no checkout date listed. When I showed this to my friends, they weren't concerned. "Maybe the app is glitching," Jessica said. "Besides, we're having such a wonderful time. What's the rush to leave?" That night I made a decision. I was going to find a way out of the resort and get help, with or without my friends. I waited until everyone was asleep, then crept out of our suite and made my way toward the service, areas I'd discovered earlier. Behind the main kitchen building, I found a delivery entrance that I hadn't seen before. The gate was locked, but I could see tire tracks leading to it, suggesting that supply trucks did come and go. I decided to wait and see if any deliveries arrived during the night. Around 4 a.m., I heard the rumble of a truck engine. I hid behind some landscaping and watched as a supply truck pulled up to the gate. A resort employee unlocked the gate from the inside, but what I saw next made me feel sick. The truck driver looked exactly like all the other resort staff. That same blank, cheerful expression, the same mechanical movements. But more disturbing, I could see the truck's license plate clearly, and it was covered with a thick layer of dust and dirt, as if the vehicle had been sitting unused for months or years. The delivery was stranger still. The staff member and driver went through the motions of unloading boxes, but I could see that the boxes were empty. They were pantomiming a delivery that wasn't actually happening. As I watched this bizarre theater, I realized the horrible truth. There were no real deliveries. There was no connection to the outside world. The resort was a completely closed system, and everyone in it, staff and guests alike, was trapped in an endless loop of vacation behavior. I crept back to our suite, my mind racing. My friends were changing more each day, becoming more like the other long-term guests who seemed to have lost all desire or ability to leave. If I didn't act soon, we'd all become permanent residents of this beautiful prison. The next morning, I tried one last time to convince my friends to leave with me. I showed them everything I'd discovered, the blocked exits, the fake internet, the mechanical behavior of the long-term guests. But they looked at me with the same blank, cheerful expression I'd seen on everyone else's face. "But why would we want to leave?" Rachel asked. "Everything here is perfect. We have everything we need. We're so happy here." I realized with horror that it was too late for them. Whatever process the resort used to trap its guests, it had already begun working on my friends. They were becoming part of Casa del Mar's permanent collection. That afternoon, while my friends enjoyed their usual poolside routine, I made my escape attempt. I'd found a section of the perimeter wall where some maintenance work had been done, leaving a small gap behind some equipment. It was barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was my only chance. The escape was terrifying. I had to crawl through dense jungle for what felt like hours, following what I hoped was the direction of the main road. Thorns tore at my clothes and insects swarmed around me, but I kept moving, driven by the desperate need to get away from that place. Finally, I reached a real road with real traffic. A passing truck driver picked me up and drove me to the nearest town, where I immediately contacted the authorities. But when I tried to explain what had happened, no one believed me. According to every official record, no resort called Casa del Mar existed in that area. The police drove me back to where I'd indicated the resort should be, but we found nothing but empty jungle. No buildings, no roads, no signs that a resort had ever existed there. My friends Jessica, Amanda, and Rachel were reported missing, but no trace of them was ever found. Their families think they disappeared while visiting Mexico, and I'm the only one who knows what really happened to them. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if I had some kind of breakdown, and my friends really did disappear through more conventional means. But then I check my phone and see the photos we took during those first few days at Casa del Mar. In the early photos, we all look normal, happy, excited to be on vacation. But in the later photos, I can see the change. Beginning in my friends' faces, their smiles become more vacant, their eyes more distant. In the last photo we took together, they look exactly like all the other long-term guests. They look perfectly content to never leave paradise. And sometimes, late at night, I get emails from travel booking sites offering me incredible deals on all-inclusive resorts. The photos always show the same pristine beaches, the same elegant accommodations, the same too-good-to-be-true prices. I delete them immediately, but I know they'll keep coming. Casa del Mar is always looking for new guests. Story 4. The Mountain Lodge. 3 months ago, my husband David and I decided to take a long weekend trip to a remote mountain lodge in the Appalachians. We'd been having marital problems and thought some time away from the city, without distractions, might help us reconnect. I found the place online, Pinecrest Lodge, a rustic retreat that promised complete isolation and a chance to discover what really matters. The photos showed a beautiful log structure nestled among towering pine trees, with no visible neighbors or modern intrusions. The website emphasized the lodge's authentic wilderness experience. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no television. Just you, your loved ones, and the peace of nature. After months of constant arguments and stress, it sounded like exactly what we needed. The drive took us deep into the mountains on increasingly narrow roads. For the last hour, we didn't see another car or even a house. The GPS lost signal about 30 minutes before we reached our destination, but the directions were simple enough. Follow the mountain road until you see the wooden sign for Pinecrest Lodge. When we finally arrived, the lodge was even more impressive than the photos suggested. It was a massive log structure, clearly built with incredible craftsmanship, surrounded by forests so dense they seemed to swallow all sound. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no airplanes overhead, not even bird calls. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles. We were greeted by the lodge owner, a man in his 60s named Harold Carpenter. He was tall and lean with weathered hands and kind eyes, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent his life in the mountains. He helped us with our luggage and gave us a tour of the lodge. "Built this place myself over 20 years ago," he said proudly as he showed us the hand-carved details and massive stone fireplace. "Every log, every beam, every piece of furniture. Wanted to create a place where people could escape the modern world and remember what life used to be like." Our room was on the second floor with a large window overlooking the forest. The furnishings were rustic but comfortable: a handmade wooden bed with soft quilts, an antique dresser, and a small sitting area with chairs positioned to take advantage of the view. There was something deeply peaceful about the space. Harold explained the lodge's routine over dinner that first evening. Meals were served at set times in the main dining room, and guests were expected to participate in communal activities like hiking, fishing, and evening storytelling sessions around the fireplace. The lodge only accommodated 8 guests at a time to maintain its intimate family-like atmosphere. The other guests seemed nice enough: an elderly couple from Ohio celebrating their 40th anniversary, a young man who said he was a writer working on a novel, and 2 middle-aged sisters taking their first vacation together in years. Everyone was friendly and seemed genuinely happy to be there. For the first 2 days, everything was perfect. David and I talked more than we had in months, took long walks through the forest, and spent evenings by the fire sharing stories with the other guests. I felt like we were finally reconnecting, remembering why we'd fallen in love in the first place. But on the 3rd day, I noticed something strange. During our morning hike, I realized we'd been walking for over 2 hours on what Harold had described as a simple 1-hour loop trail. When I mentioned this to David, he seemed confused. "Has it really been that long?" "It feels like we just started." I checked my watch and was shocked to see it was already past noon. We'd started hiking at 9 a.m., but somehow 3 hours had passed in what felt like 1. We hurried back to the lodge, worried about missing lunch, but when we arrived, Harold acted as if we were right on time. "Perfect timing," he said with his warm smile. "Lunch is just being served." But according to my watch, lunch was 3 hours late. That evening, during the storytelling session, I paid closer attention to the other guests. The elderly couple was sharing the same story they'd told on our first night, word for word, with identical gestures and expressions. The writer was describing his novel using the exact same phrases he'd used before. Even their laughter came at precisely the same moments. When I quietly pointed this out to David, he looked at me with concern. "Honey, are you feeling all right? They're just sharing their experiences. It's natural that people might repeat favorite stories." But I knew what I'd observed. These weren't casual repetitions. They were exact replicas, like recordings being played back. On our 4th day, I decided to test something. During the morning storytelling session, I told a detailed story about our wedding day, including specific details about the venue, the weather, and funny moments from the reception. Everyone listened politely and seemed engaged. That evening, the young writer told a story about his wedding day. It was my story, detail for detail, but he told it as if he'd experienced it himself. When I confronted him about this, he looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken. That's definitely my wedding story. I remember it quite clearly." The other guest nodded in agreement, backing up his claim. Even David seemed to think I was confused. "Maybe you're getting tired, sweetheart. Sometimes when we're relaxed, our memories can get a bit jumbled." That night, I lay awake trying to make sense of what was happening. I'd started keeping a journal since our arrival, writing down events and conversations to help me remember our trip. When I reread my entries, I discovered something terrifying. My handwriting was changing. The first entries looked like my normal handwriting, but each day's entry was written in a slightly different style. By the 4th day, the handwriting looked more like Harold's careful script than my own rushed scrawl. Even more disturbing, the content of my entries didn't match my memories. According to what I'd written, we'd been at the lodge for over a week, not 4 days. The entries described activities and conversations I couldn't remember, all written in increasing detail about how perfect and peaceful everything was. I woke David and showed him the journal, but he couldn't see the discrepancies. "It looks like your normal handwriting to me," he said. "And I remember all these things we did. Honey, I think you might be having some kind of stress reaction. Maybe we should ask Harold if there's a doctor nearby." That's when I realized David was changing too. His speech patterns were becoming more like Harold's, slower, more measured, with a certain old-fashioned formality that wasn't natural to him, and his eyes had that same distant, peaceful expression I'd been seeing on all the other guests. The next morning, I made a desperate decision. While everyone was busy with their morning routines, I snuck out of the lodge and tried to find my way back to the main road. I knew it was roughly 3 miles through the forest, and I thought if I could just get to our car, I could drive for help. But the forest seemed different than it had on our arrival. The trails that Harold had shown us led in circles, always bringing me back to the lodge from different directions. I tried following the sun, using it as a compass, but somehow I kept ending up back where I started. After hours of hiking, I was exhausted and disoriented. As I emerged from the trees for what must have been the 10th time, I saw Harold waiting for me on the lodge's front porch. "There you are, Sarah," he said with his gentle smile. "We were wondering where you'd wandered off to. You missed lunch, but I saved you a plate." "Harold, I need to leave. David and I need to go home." His expression remained kind, but something shifted in his eyes. "Now why would you want to do that? You're having such a wonderful time here. You and David are finally happy together again. Isn't that what you came here for?" He was right about one thing. David did seem happy, happier than he'd been in years. But it wasn't real happiness. It was the contentment of someone who'd stopped wanting anything beyond their immediate circumstances. "You can't keep us here," I said. "People will come looking for us." Harold's smile never wavered. "Oh, but Sarah, no one's keeping you here. You're staying because you want to. Because this is where you belong now. This is where you're meant to be." That evening, I tried one more time to convince David to leave with me. I explained everything I'd observed, the repeating conversations, the impossible geography, the way time seemed to function differently at the lodge. But he listened, with the patient expression of someone humoring a confused person. "Sarah, sweetheart, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. You've been under so much stress lately, but look around, we're in paradise. We're finally getting along. Why would you want to ruin that?" As he spoke, I noticed that his face was changing. Not dramatically, but subtly. His features were becoming more generic, more like the other male guests at the lodge. The specific details that made him uniquely David were being smoothed away, replaced by a kind of pleasant, universal masculinity. I realized that the lodge wasn't just trapping people. It was gradually erasing their individual identities, turning them into generic guests who would never want to leave because they'd forgotten they'd ever been anyone else. That night, I made my escape attempt. I'd hidden supplies and a flashlight earlier in the day, and I waited until everyone was asleep before slipping out of the lodge. This time, instead of trying to follow trails, I used the stars to navigate, heading in what I believed was the direction of the main road. The forest was terrifying in the darkness. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, not animal sounds, but whispers and calls that sounded almost human. Several times I heard David calling my name from somewhere behind me, begging me to come back. But I knew it wasn't really David anymore. I walked all night, pushing through underbrush and climbing over fallen logs, determined to find civilization. As dawn broke, I finally heard the blessed sound of traffic in the distance. I emerged from the forest onto a paved road and flagged down the first car I saw. The driver, a local man, was shocked to see me stumbling out of the woods in my torn clothes and muddy shoes. "Ma'am, are you all right? What were you doing in there?" When I told him about Pinecrest Lodge, his expression grew troubled. "There ain't no lodge back in those woods, ma'am. Nothing but wilderness for 50 miles. You must be confused." But I insisted, and he agreed to call the police. When the authorities arrived, I led them back into the forest, sure I could find the lodge again. We hiked for hours, following what I was certain was the path I'd taken to escape. We found nothing. No lodge, no buildings, no signs that anyone had ever lived in those woods. The official report concluded that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown during our vacation and had wandered into the forest in a confused state. According to their investigation, David and I had been staying at a regular hotel in town, and David had reported me missing when I'd failed to return from a solo hike. But I know what really happened. David is still at Pinecrest Lodge, living out an endless, peaceful vacation with the other guests who can never leave. He's probably forgotten he was ever married to me, forgotten he ever had a life outside those woods. Sometimes I drive back to that area and park by the side of the road, looking into the forest and listening. If I concentrate, I can hear it, that gentle whisper of wind through pine needles that sounds almost like voices calling my name, inviting me to come back. Come back to paradise. Come back to where I belong. Come back to where I'll never have to worry about anything ever again. The invitation is always there, patient and persistent, and sometimes, when life gets particularly difficult, when the stress and arguments and responsibilities become overwhelming, I find myself seriously considering it. How bad would it really be to live an eternal vacation, surrounded by peace and contentment, never having to make difficult decisions or face painful realities again? But then I remembered David's changing face, the way his personality was being slowly erased and replaced with generic happiness. And I drive away, back to my complicated, imperfect, but real life, though sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice. Story 5. The Seaside Bed and Breakfast. For our 5th wedding anniversary, my wife Claire and I booked a romantic weekend at a charming bed and breakfast called Seaview Manor in a small coastal town in Maine. The Victorian mansion sat on a cliff, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and the online reviews praised its old-world charm, gourmet breakfasts, and attentive hosts. The drive from Boston took us through picturesque New England countryside, and as we approached the coast, the scenery became increasingly beautiful. Ancient lighthouses dotted the rocky shoreline. Fishing boats bobbed in harbors, and everything seemed touched by that golden late summer light that makes you want to slow down and savor every moment. Seaview Manor was stunning. A perfectly preserved 1890s mansion painted in deep blue with white trim, surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens. The ocean view was spectacular, with waves crashing against the rocks below and seabirds circling overhead. We felt like we'd stepped back in time, to a more elegant era. We were greeted by the owners, Margaret and Thomas Ashford, a couple in their 70s who'd been running the bed and breakfast for over 30 years. Margaret was gracious and welcoming, with silver hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style and a warm smile that made us feel like family. Thomas was quieter but equally friendly, helping with our luggage and offering recommendations for local attractions. "You're in the Rosewood Suite," Margaret said as she led us up the grand staircase. "It's our finest room with the best ocean view in the house. Many couples have celebrated special occasions there over the years." The suite was beautiful, antique furniture, rich fabrics, and tall windows that filled the room with natural light. The bathroom had been modernized but maintained its Victorian character, with a clawfoot tub and period fixtures. Everything was spotless and elegant. That first evening was perfect. Margaret prepared an incredible dinner featuring local seafood and fresh herbs from her garden. We dined by candlelight in an elegant dining room overlooking the ocean, feeling like characters in a romantic novel. The other guests, 2 other couples and an elderly woman traveling alone, were pleasant company, and we all shared stories and laughter over wine. After dinner, Thomas regaled us with tales of the mansion's history. It had been built by a wealthy shipping merchant who'd wanted to create the perfect summer retreat for his family. The merchant, also named Thomas, had spared no expense in the construction, importing materials from Europe and hiring the finest craftsmen of the era. "The original Thomas Ashford was my great-grandfather," our host explained. "This place has been in our family for 5 generations. We're the guardians of its legacy, making sure it continues to provide the same level of hospitality and comfort that it always has. The first night I slept better than I had in months. There was something deeply soothing about the sound of waves crashing below and the way the sea breeze moved through the old windows. Claire and I felt closer than we had in a long time. reminded of why we'd fallen in love in the first place. But on our second morning, I noticed something odd during breakfast. Margaret was serving the exact same meal she'd prepared the day before. Not similar dishes, but identical portions arranged on identical plates. When I complimented her on the delicious blueberry pancakes, she responded with the exact same words she'd used the previous morning. "Why, thank you, dear. The secret is using wild blueberries from the bushes on our property. They've been growing here for over a century." Even her inflection was identical to the day before. I mentioned this to Claire, but she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Maybe it's just their standard breakfast. Some places serve the same thing every day. But it wasn't just breakfast. As the day progressed, I realized that everything was happening exactly as it had the day before. The other guests had the same conversations, asked the same questions, and even sat in the same chairs. Thomas told the exact same stories about the mansion's history, using identical words and gestures. When I tried to ask different questions or change the flow of conversation, people responded politely, but somehow steered things back to the established script. It was like being in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. That afternoon, while Claire was napping, I decided to explore the mansion more thoroughly. In the basement, I discovered a room that hadn't been part of our original tour. It was filled with old photographs, documents, and guest registers dating back decades. As I flipped through the guest books, I found something that made my hands shake. The same names appeared over and over again, sometimes with gaps of years between entries, but definitely the same people. The elderly woman traveling alone had supposedly been visiting the lodge annually since 1987. One of the couples had entries spanning 15 years, but the most disturbing discovery was in a photo album labeled Happy Guests 1995 to 2005. I found a picture of Claire and myself sitting in the dining room, looking exactly as we did now. The photo was dated 8 years ago, before we'd even met. I confronted Margaret about the photograph, and for the first time, her warm demeanor faltered slightly. "Oh my, that is unusual," she said, examining the photo. "You do look remarkably similar to this couple. What a strange coincidence." But her explanation felt hollow, and I noticed that her eyes had gone cold despite her continued smile. That evening, I tried to convince Claire that something was wrong with the lodge, that we needed to leave immediately. But she looked at me, like I was talking nonsense. "Leave? But we just got here. And we're having such a wonderful time. Look how beautiful this place is, how peaceful we feel. Why would you want to ruin that?" I pulled out the photograph to show her, but when I looked at it again, it had changed. The couple in the picture still looked like us, but now they were wearing different clothes and sitting in different positions. As I watched, horrified, the image seemed to shift and move slightly like a living thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the waves and trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. Around 3 a.m., I heard voices coming from somewhere in the walls, whispers and conversations that seemed to be coming from inside the mansion itself. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall, following the sound. The voices were clearer near the fireplace in our room. They sounded like previous guests having conversations about their stays at the lodge, but the voices were faint and echoing, as if they were coming from far away or from people who were no longer entirely present. I heard a couple discussing their anniversary dinner, a family planning activities for their children, a lone traveler talking about finding peace in solitude. But underneath all these normal vacation conversations was something else, a note of confusion, of people slowly realizing that something wasn't quite right. "How long have we been here?" I heard one voice ask. "I'm not sure," came the reply. "It feels like we just arrived, but also like we've been here forever." The next morning, I tried to call our families using the lodge's landline phone. Margaret said she'd be happy to help me place the call, but when she dialed, she always got a busy signal or no answer. "The phone service can be unreliable out here," she explained. "The isolation that makes this place so special also means we're sometimes cut off from the outside world." I asked about using their computer to send emails, but Thomas explained that they didn't have internet service. "We pride ourselves on being a true escape from the digital world. Our guests find it refreshing to be completely disconnected." but I'd seen a wireless router in the office behind the front desk, and there had definitely been Wi-Fi listed among the amenities when I'd booked our stay. On what should have been our final morning, I woke up to find our luggage had been unpacked and put away in the room's dresser and closet. When I asked Claire about this, she seemed confused. I unpacked yesterday, remember? We're staying for the full week. That's what we always do. Always do? Claire, this is our first time here, and we only booked for 3 nights. She looked at me with the same patient expression Margaret had used when I'd asked about the photograph. Sweetheart, I think you're getting confused. We come here every year for our anniversary. It's our special tradition. I checked our reservation confirmation on my phone, but the dates had changed. Instead of a 3-night weekend stay, it now showed a week-long booking. But I knew I'd only booked 3 nights, and I knew we'd only taken time off work for a long weekend. In desperation, I tried to leave on my own. I told everyone I was going for a walk and headed for our car, planning to drive for help. But when I reached the parking area, our car was gone. In its place was a different vehicle with the same license plate number, an older model that looked like it had been sitting there for years. The keys in my pocket still worked, but when I started the engine, the car wouldn't move. The transmission seemed to be stuck, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't get it to shift into any gear that would allow me to drive away from the lodge. Thomas appeared beside the car as if he'd materialized from thin air. "Having trouble with the automobile?" he asked. "These old machines can be temperamental. Why don't you come inside and I'll take a look at it later?" I had no choice but to follow him back to the lodge. That afternoon, I tried to ask the other guests about their experiences, hoping to find someone else who'd noticed the strange inconsistencies, but they all gave me the same types of responses: confused looks, patient explanations about how wonderful their stays had been, and suggestions that I might be feeling overwhelmed by the peacefulness of the place. The elderly woman who'd been traveling alone pulled me aside during the afternoon tea service. "I know what you're experiencing, dear," she said in a low voice. "The confusion, the sense that something isn't quite right. I felt the same way during my first visit." "Your first visit? But you told us you've been coming here for years." "I have been coming here for years, that's the point. I came for a weekend getaway in 1987, just like you. I was going to leave on Sunday morning, just like you planned to. But somehow Sunday never came. Or it came and went so many times that it stopped meaning anything." She gestured around the elegant sitting room where we were having tea. "This place exists outside of normal time, dear. The Ashfords have found a way to preserve perfect moments to keep them from ever ending. Your romantic weekend will last forever. You'll never have to worry about returning to the stress and problems of your regular life." "But that's not living," I protested. "That's just existing." "Is it?" she asked. "Look at your husband. Have you ever seen him so relaxed, so content? He's not worried about work deadlines or financial problems or any of the things that were causing tension in your marriage. He's just here, present with you, experiencing pure happiness." I looked across the room at David, who was chatting with Thomas by the fireplace. She was right. He looked completely at peace in a way I hadn't seen in years. But I also knew it wasn't really David anymore. It was a version of David that had been edited, simplified, reduced to only the parts that fit perfectly into the lodge's eternal vacation experience. That night, I made one final attempt to escape. I waited until everyone was asleep, then climbed out the window of our second-floor room onto the roof. From there, I was able to drop down to the first floor and make my way to the forest without using any of the doors. I hiked through the darkness, for hours using the stars to maintain my direction. This time I was determined not to let the strange geography of the place confuse me. I marked trees as I passed them and constantly checked my compass to ensure I was heading away from the lodge. After what felt like an entire night of walking, I saw lights ahead. Real electric lights, not the warm glow of the lodge's gas lamps. I stumbled out of the forest onto a highway and was picked up by a state trooper who'd been patrolling the area. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look like you've been lost in the woods all night." I explained about the lodge, about my husband still being trapped there, about the need for immediate rescue. The trooper was professional and concerned, radioing for backup and taking detailed notes about the location. But when we returned to the area with a full search team, we found nothing. No Victorian mansion, no clifftop location, no Seaview Manor. Just dense forest stretching for miles inland from a rocky, inaccessible coastline. The official report concluded that I'd had some kind of psychological episode during our vacation and had wandered into the woods in a confused state. According to hotel records in the nearby town, David and I had checked into a regular motel, and David had reported me missing when I'd failed to return from a walk. But I know what really happened. David is still at Seaview Manor, enjoying his eternal anniversary weekend with Claire, or with whatever the lodge has convinced him I am. He's probably sitting in that elegant dining room right now, listening to Thomas tell the same stories about the mansion's history, completely content to repeat the same perfect days forever. I've tried to find the place again, driving up and down the main coast and searching for any trace of the bed and breakfast. I've contacted tourism boards, historical societies, and local newspapers, but no one has ever heard of Seaview Manor or the Ashford family. Yet sometimes I receive emails from travel booking sites featuring a beautiful Victorian mansion overlooking the ocean. The photos show the exact same rooms, the same views, the same elegant details I remember. The listing is always for Seaview Manor with hosts named Margaret and Thomas Ashford. And in the guest testimonials, I sometimes see familiar names. Couples who've written glowing reviews about their life-changing experiences at the lodge, their perfect romantic getaways that help them remember what really matters. I recognize some of those names from the guest registers I found in the basement. People who've been guests for decades, all writing enthusiastic reviews about their ongoing stays at a place that supposedly doesn't exist. Last month, I received a handwritten letter with no return address. The handwriting was David's, but the words felt wrong, too formal and polished to be his natural voice. My dearest Sarah, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted you to know that I'm incredibly happy here at Seaview Manor. Margaret and Thomas take such wonderful care of all their guests, and every day brings new joy and contentment. I've found the peace I was searching for, and I hope someday you'll find your way back to share it with me. There's always a place for you here in paradise. Love always, David. I burned the letter, but I kept the envelope. The postmark was from that same coastal town in Maine, dated just a week before I received it. David has been missing for 6 months now, but apparently he's still writing letters, still enjoying his perfect, endless vacation, still waiting for me to come back and join him in paradise.